So last week we talked and we learned about the perpetrators of the Holocaust. Dr. Katrina Van Kallenbach shared with us the many stories of the German perpetrators. Today we're going to take a little bit of a different look. What was the Holocaust? The Holocaust has come to signify the very destruction and martyrdom of European Jews under the Nazi occupation during the Second World War. The word Holocaust literally means massive destruction by fire. It's generally accepted that a total of excess of 10 million people were murdered by the Nazi regime, including political opponents, gypsies, the mentally ill, homosexuals, and other undesirables. An estimated 6 million people were killed simply because they were Jews. For the first time in history, an entire people was targeted for annihilation by a government. The Nazi state sought to implement a final solution to destroy all Jews simply because they existed. 70 years after the fact, the Holocaust remains an important and relevant subject for study both in the classroom and in public lectures. And ultimately, this study will teach us valuable lessons about ourselves, human nature, and our society. Tonight we'll experience a compelling story of humanity, one in which demonstrates extreme courage, faith, physical and emotional strength, as well as unspeakable terror and cruelty. By examining good and evil in human nature, people of all ages can look inward to better understand ourselves and our relationship to others. The Holocaust is a history of an enduring horror and sorrow. However, tonight's presentation is not a discussion of death, but rather a sharing of one man's personal testament in a fight for life. We'll hear from a man who possessed the courage to cling to life in the face of hell on earth. A man who faced fear and chose to embrace his will to live. Together, and we'll meet and spend an extraordinary evening with a very ordinary man whose courage was forged in the bowels of an extraordinary fight for survival. We are privileged to hear a remarkable story of overcoming the worst of humanity and a personal journey of triumph. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Martin Lowenberg.
Thank you very much. It's so glad to have you. Before I begin, good evening, everyone. I'm honored and privileged to address such a wonderful, wonderful audience. And believe it or not, I'm speechless for the wonderful turnout that assembled here tonight. But who was responsible? And who is responsible for all this? And I have to thank Mr. Trautmann, who originally contacted me, and naturally I would not refuse. Mr. Marzak, Dr. Marzak, I should say, thank you so much for inviting me as well. And also Rabbi Alpert and his wife Hannah, and the minister, who definitely we've known each other already for a few years, and I was really hoping that we could meet again. Thank you. And of course I want to also welcome the wonderful members of the Jewish congregation here, the board member, and also who have gathered here as well. Thank you so very much for coming, and I wish all of you many, many more years that you can attend these functions. I'm here, of course, I'll tell you, before I go any further, I am very proud to see that Muskegon has not lost its Jewish identity, that there are Jewish people living here and have a wonderful life among all these wonderful community members. I sometimes go to different communities, like I did last week. I was in Appleton, Wisconsin, and I was there for three days. And unfortunately, I did not see a Jewish person there. Why? There aren't any there. Because the people don't even know what a Jewish person looks like. You might smile, but it is very true. Because I said, you see, look at me. I don't have horns, and I'm as human as anybody else. But unfortunately, many people don't know what a Jewish person is. And of course, we can go back in history, into the Jewish history and Christian history, which was once, they were just people. The only one that made the difference between Jews and Christians and other people was Hitler. The man was not normal, but yet again, he spoke out, and he spoke out so loud that everyone heard him speak and also followed him. They thought, he is a man that we can trust. It was the wrong person. And believe it or not, as we're sitting here and we pledge the allegiance to the flag of America, we should only be glad that we are so fortunate that who live in a country, the best country in the world. And I'm sure you're listening and you're watching different news reports from all over the world. And you also see the suffering that is going on. The suffering of people subjected by some leaders that are dictators and not a type of government, a safe government like what we have here. Children are subjected. Adults are being tortured. And what is happening? And our hands are tied because what can we do? Nobody wants to listen to us, how fortunate we are and what a wonderful country we have here. Unfortunately, this was not what happened during World War II, which started in Germany and then went to Holland, and then first went to Poland, and then Czechoslovakia, and Holland, and Belgium, and France, and Italy, and other countries. Sometimes people don't realize to follow the wrong person. And they only find out when it is too late. But I'm really coming back to World War II. But not just World War II. But from the beginning on of what happened on January the 30th of 1933, before that it was a wonderful country. My parents enjoyed it. My grandparents enjoyed it. My great-grandparents. We have been living in Germany since the early 1700s. But then everything spoiled. Everything was rotten. And people were subjected to torture, and people were killed. Yes, we just heard there were 6 million Jewish people that were killed. 5 million non-Jewish people. 11 million, over 11 million people were killed. And how about 1.5 million children who have never ever done anything to anybody, who have never started to live? Think about what they could have contributed to society. They were unusual. They were not dumb. They were not sick. These were normal children who were torn away from their parents. And simply they were killed. How awful. And when we think about our own children, God forbid, if anything like that would have happened, what would I do? What could I do? They were torn away. Yes. Holocaust, an ancient Greek word, destruction of human being by fire, and never ever in the history of mankind has there been an event where so many people were gassed, were burned. Think about it. It's tragic. And that's all one can say. But as we're sitting here, that's all we can say. But what about those that have lost the dear ones? It seems a little different. This is the little village that I was born in. And it's a beautiful little village. And I've been there several times in the past 7 years. And I was speaking to young students in schools, in universities, people in communities, in churches. But they cannot understand. Is this what happened here? Well, ask your parents, and they would have known what happened. And I mentioned that. Oh, yes, we knew some Jewish people. I know. But I knew a lot of them too. But where are they? And what happened to them? It's a beautiful village and it's a peaceful village. But the people inside were the ones that ruined it. There's a tree in that village that's over 1,000 years old. And the tree is still blooming. But the Jewish people are gone. No longer there. They wanted to cleanse the communities of Jews. These were my grandparents. They were born there. And they're also buried there. Even though during the war they tumbled over the stones. But we put them back up again to make sure that there was a place for them, and there still is a place for them. These were my parents. And they were also born there. But unfortunately, their ashes were scattered all over Auschwitz. When that happened, I became an orphan of 15. Yes. How horrible to think about it. And when I talk to young people, and I say, God forbid, something like that should never happen to you. And I spoke to over 1,000 people last week for 3 days in Appleton, or a town next to called Wrightstown. And I said, love your parents as much as you can, because they'll always be there for you. But unfortunately, they were not always there for me. People think that there were only a few concentration camps, like Buchenwald, like Dachau, like Auschwitz, which was the worst of all, like Berdyansk. But actually there were hundreds of these camps scattered all over Europe. And there were thousands and thousands and millions of people that were incarcerated in those camps. Yes, this was in the New York Times. It appeared last year on March the 3rd, 2013. This whole page. Awful when you think about it. These are some invoices that my grandparents used to send to their customers because they were supplying the people, the farmers, with feed for the animals and also seed and fertilizer and so on for the fields. And they used to send out these statements and invoices. And there's this one all the way on top. It lists the name of our little village, and on the bottom says telephone number 2, to show you how early we already enjoyed a telephone, but we could only keep that telephone until 1934 when they took that away from us, because they didn't want Jews to use it anymore. Hitler came to power on January the 30th of 1933. But on March the 15th, there were some young farmhands sitting in a bar, drinking beer, and somebody comes along and says, "Here, I'll buy you a beer. Come on, drink as much as you want. When you're through, I want you to burn down that Jew's house," meaning us. And on March the 15th, that night, they burned down our house. They destroyed it completely, and whatever was not destroyed, they looted. And we became very poor at that time. But where can we go? Transportation was very limited. You couldn't go anywhere. There were no airplanes. There were no automobiles. horse and wagon, and also bicycles. And there was a train that went through our village once a day. So we were stuck. But luckily, there were still people who said, we'll help you rebuild again. You cannot leave here. And we did rebuild again. And I was the youngest of 7 children at the time, but my oldest siblings, who were already in the early 20s, they were born in 1913 and 1914, sister and a brother. They were called names: you damn Jew, drop dead you Jew, vanish. We don't want you here. Go to Palestine with the rest of the Jews. They were lucky to get out and emigrate into Palestine at the time. They had to say goodbye. And that was the beginning of 1934. But we also, after that, we moved into the house, into a new house. Yes. But shortly after we moved in, my mother gave birth to twin boys. And they were being held on the right by my sister Eva. She was 10 years old at the time, and she was 11 at that time in 1934. And she is now 90 years old and lives in New York. I speak to her every single day, believe it or not. Ask my wife. And then the other one is Margot, and she's holding the other twin. And she's now 93 years old, and she lives in San Diego, California. And we also talk to each other very, very often, at least every other week. But they're holding the twins that were born in 1934. And on the left is Kurt, like your name. And on the right is Fritz. We all had German names. We believed in Germany. Germany was our country. We didn't know any difference. But somebody made that difference. This particular lady, who I met in Germany when I was there, and she was the little girl that took, of 15, that took care of the twins. And she used to say, this is the house, by the way, today, and she used to say, up there, on the right, this is where I lived with the twins, and I took care of them. I loved them. But she could only stay with us for 1 year, because her life was already in jeopardy. It was already being threatened. If you continue working for those Jews, you'll see what happens. Well, her parents and my parents decided she better leave us, better leave our employment. They had many meetings already. In the beginning of as early as beginning of 1933, about the Jews. The one in the middle, that's the little village, that's our little village, St. Clanksfield. But they were going to have a meeting. We're going to do something about those Jews, those Jewish bloodsuckers, the liars, the thieves. We don't want those kind of people. Well, we didn't want the type of people that were asking innocent people to join them because they were nothing. On the left is an announcement from another village nearby, and they wanted to build a gallows and hang the Jewish teacher from it. How fast it changed. They were standing in front of Jewish shops, and they said, "Germans, beware, don't buy from Jews." And of course we couldn't sit on the park bench anymore, because those were marked for Aryans only, which were Germans. There were even some thugs who didn't know any better. I'm sure they couldn't even read. But standing in front of a store that belonged to an American company and that had outlets in Germany. And I think most of you know what that company was and who it belonged to, because it belonged to Christian people by the name of Hutton. Woolworth. At the time, the most popular type of store, the 5 and dime store, where people enjoyed shopping. Oh, so much went on. They had demonstrations twice a week in the middle of villages, in the middle of towns and cities. And of course, that time, very, very few people had a radio. But Hitler made sure that there were loudspeakers in every one of those villages, and the people could listen to what he had to say. And of course he said, everybody's going to have a job, since this was shortly after the Depression in Germany. And we're going to build an automobile. And it's going to be the people's car. But it was not the people's car, because he was really already getting ready for war as early as then. What's the people's car? The Volkswagen. People was folk, wagon was car. And they did build it. But you have to belong to my army. You have to belong to me. Then you'll have a job. Otherwise you will not have a job. He also liked the way people used to salute. In Roman times, Caesar, hail Caesar. Well, he wanted everybody to salute him. And of course the Hitler Youth, they were trained the same way. These people were destructive. Compare them to our Boys Club of America, who is constructive. They want to help people. They wanted to destroy people. That's the difference. So much went down. This was the school that I went to, the public school in our village. And in 1936, when I was 8 years old, I had a teacher who used to come occasionally in uniform into the classroom. And of course there was a picture hanging of Hitler in front of the room. On April the 20th of 1936. April the 20th was his birthday, and it was in 1936 at that time. He assembled the students from all over the school into our classroom. When he suddenly pointed to me And he says, come up here. Naturally, when the teacher says, come up here, you come up here. And I did. And I stood right in front of him, in front of the class. And he accused me of having stuck out my tongue at Hitler's picture. And he screamed at me and he dared, how dare you insult our Führer, our leader? I didn't know what he meant, because I would have never done that. Needless to say. So he asked 4 boys from the back to beat me up. And they came up front and they beat me up so badly I was on the floor crying, and that was not enough. He was standing over there with a board in his hand which was covered with thumbtacks and nails, and he came up and he put that down on his chair, picked me up from the floor and pushed me right on top of it. Naturally, that was the last day for me in public school, and I never ever went back again. But I hurt so badly. That's what happened at that time already, before the Holocaust. That was the torture that we had to endure, and the insults and everything else. But my parents had to send me away to a boarding school, about 150 miles away from home. This was me. And this was a Jewish boarding school, and children came from all over. But we had to live there. We had to stay there. We could not go home, because at that time we already needed special passes to go by train, which was the only way of transportation. So for 2 years, except once I was able to come home, but for 2 years I was in that school. And I was there with many, many children, and we could only write postal cards home. This is the building today, which is named after somebody. Her name is Sophie Scholl. And this was in 1943, when Sophie Scholl and her brother Hans and other students, college students, made up pamphlets. Everything that was wrong with Germany now, everything was what was going on. But they were caught. And they were tried. And unfortunately, they were sentenced to death. They were beheaded by guillotine. There are books out about her. The White Rose, or Sophie Scholl. Very interesting book, and even a film. You might be able to avail yourself to that through the library or otherwise. But that's what happened in that particular building, and today it is now a school for underprivileged children. And so were we. We could only write postal cards home, which were intercepted by the postal department to make sure that we did not write, or my parents didn't write anything to us about the system. This is us. We were very happy there. We were all together. We were also able to celebrate our holidays and everything. And our counselors and teachers made sure that we were very well taken care of without our family, but we were very homesick. And we cried many, many nights. After all, we were gone for about 2 years, except once we came home in the summertime of 1937. And while we were home, Margaret also came home. She was working for a family in Frankfurt, taking care of children. And that particular family had a chance to emigrate to the United States. And she asked him if she could come along. And of course they then put her name on their affidavits. And she was able to get out. My father paid for all the expenses. She was 17. Then there's Eva. She was 14. I was 9 years old. And Fritz and Kurt were 3 years old, and my parents. This was the last family picture, by the way. But in 1938, we were forced to move. We could no longer live in our little village. They wanted to cleanse all those villages of Jews. So what happened? We had to move. We were forced to sell our house for the lowest price that somebody offered us. And we had to move to a larger city. But we were put in a very, very small, confined area in a house which was only for Jews. We had one room, and there was a little kitchen, and the bathroom was shared by everyone in that house, which stood right across from the synagogue. Because people could not move into houses where non-Jewish people were living. Because there were signs even outside that says, for Aryans only, or not for Jews. Or Jews are forbidden to live here. Anyway, I went to school. I met new classmates. I met new teachers. And of course, we also had a synagogue there, which we could attend. It was okay, nothing wrong. But on November the 8th, November the 9th, while we were sitting in the classroom, suddenly stones and rocks came flying through the windows, and 3 of my fellow classmates were very badly hurt from the shards of glass and also from the stones. And of course the teacher immediately dismissed the class and he says, run home as fast as you can. And we did. On our way home, we already saw people being dragged home from their, were being dragged home from their, pardon me, excuse me one moment. Sorry. They were being dragged from their homes into the street and beaten terribly. And of course that is true. There were over 100, close to 100 people that were killed on that particular day. Hundreds and hundreds of synagogues were destroyed by fire, or they were torn down. And thousands of people were subjected to concentration camp. The first one that was ever built was Dachau. That was built in 1933. And they took a lot of the people already there as early as 1933. They called them communists. And who were the communists? The Jews. Then they built another concentration camp, which was called Sachsenhausen. where they did live experiments on people, homosexuals, physically, mentally handicapped, and many others. The third one was built at the end of 1937, and that was Buchenwald. The next morning after the Kristallnacht, after the night of broken glass, the soldiers and the police went wild and knocked on every Jewish home. And they were arresting every Jewish man from the age of 18 up to the age of 60. And some of the fellows that looked even older than 16 and 17, they said, "You're lying to me. You come with us too." When my father was arrested, the policeman said to him, "You come with us." But my father gave him an argument. He said, "What are you arresting me for? Come on, you Jew." And my father said, "Do you know that I was an officer in the First World War, fighting for Germany? And now you're arresting me for what?" My father had no choice but go with them. This is the synagogue, our synagogue, that was still after the next day. This was our little synagogue that was there in our little village, but it was just adjacent to another, to a house where Christian people were living, and they couldn't burn that down. So therefore they tore it down. But here is Buchenwald. Thousands and thousands of people were incarcerated there. Their heads were shorn immediately, were shaved. They're now prisoners. And why? The action was called Aktion, was Jude, because they were Jewish. Fortunately for my father, he was there a month, whereas others were there for as long as a year, and some never ever came home again to their families. And people tried so hard without avail just to get out of the country. But where do you go? First of all, you had to pay a very high tax, which was called the Jew tax. And of course, if you go any further than the nearby countries, it took so long. 2 weeks you had to be on a ship. And look at all the money that it took. Not just for one person, but for the whole family. So we were stuck. We were poor. And we couldn't get out. And besides that, other countries, like the United States, would not let just Jews come in. We don't want all those Jews. And all the other countries felt the same way. So they had a quota. We will only take so many in, which was just hardly enough to talk about. There was a ship that left in May of 1939 from Bremerhaven, from the port of Bremen, and went to Cuba with over 900 people on. And that particular ship, it was called the St. Louis. And the captain was such a wonderful person, really. He was so courageous. But what happened? And these people, every one of them, had entry visas to get into Cuba. But when it got into the port of Havana, suddenly the Minister of Immigration came, I don't want these people. But wait a minute, they all had papers. I don't want them. And they negotiated with them, including the captain of the ship, negotiated with them. To no avail. Guess what? After 5 days, that ship went on to Miami. And it was sitting in the harbor of Miami. And it was immediately surrounded by the United States Coast Guard. But everyone was refused entry into the United States. We don't want those Jews either. So it went back again to Havana and continued negotiating with the Minister of Immigration, and finally it stopped in Belgium, and few people got off in Belgium, a few people got off in Holland, and then everybody else got off in Germany. And most of those people wound up in Auschwitz and were killed. Imagine. Who wants the Jews? And that's the way it was at that time. How sad. When my father came out from Buchenwald, he was given a pick and shovel, and they had to dig ditches. And my father's right there at the end. Yes. That was all that Jews could do now. Slave work already. People didn't have any more, were no longer citizens, because the citizenship was taken away from them. And no matter how long the families had been living in Germany, the Jews are no citizens of our country. So they were standing by the police department and trying to get some kind of document to show who they are. So maybe they have a chance to still emigrate to another country. But they were told, why don't you go home, we'll send it to you. Well, they did give us a new identity card. But before they did, they gave us also a middle name. Because because all of us had German names. Kurt. And so many. Martin. But here's a girl, her name was Ursula. So they gave the women a middle name of Sarah, and they gave the men a middle name of Israel. That's the history. That was a picture of me when I became 13 years old. And it was called Bar Mitzvah. When I accepted all the commandments of a man. But we didn't have a party, because usually people have a big party, people celebrate, and it's really a wonderful day. But here we could not even celebrate. We hardly had anything to eat. Here's Fritz and Kurt, and they're supposed to be, this was supposed to be a school picture. But they never went to school for one day. And look at how nice they look. A nice shirt, nice pants, and look at the socks. My mother made all of that because she couldn't go to a store anymore and buy them clothing. They go away, you Jew. Sorry, we don't have it. So she sewed it. We had a sewing machine. I don't know how she got the material, but she made it so they would look nice. And we also wanted to look nice. That's why they gave us the star to wear. I'm being facetious. In September of 1941, they gave us the star. It says Jude, Jew. And I don't say when we went out. And we had to put that on every jacket and on every coat or outer clothing. And if we go out, we couldn't, because they recognized us immediately and they threw stones at us, rocks, rotten eggs, rotten tomatoes, just pelleted on us. Yes, unfortunately, we did not go out anymore, but we had this to wear now, our badge, so everybody would recognize us. On December the 7th, or in December the 5th, we received notice that we're going to be resettled. And on December the 8th, which was on Monday, December the 8th of 1941, we were to assemble near the railroad station. And they gave us instructions how to pack. And we could only take a very small suitcase. Warm clothing and some food. And how much can you get in a very small suitcase like that, particularly like that screen, the size of that screen? Couldn't take very much. But pack everything that you have. We want to make sure that it's going to be forwarded to you. And on December the 5th, we had to go to the bank and deposit all our valuables, including our flatware and everything, the silver, what we had. And when we got there, somebody wrote down numbers, a young fellow. Never forget his face, because I went with my father that time, on that Friday. And he wrote everything down, just figures. And he says, when you come back, you'll have it again. We'll keep it for safekeeping. But you know what? We never got anything back again. And everything that we had in our little apartment, we packed up and we put it in boxes and we marked it and we took an inventory of what we had. And you know what? We never got anything again. So that's why some of these people took a big suitcase, which was later taken away from them. Because you didn't follow our instructions. That morning of December the 8th, the day after Pearl Harbor, by the way, here, that afternoon we stand here at the ramp and we're waiting for the trains to take us someplace. And we didn't know where. And everybody was asking the same questions, where are they going to take us? And everybody thought they would take us to Poland. But that was not the case. So they put us in these horrible cars, boxcars and cattle cars. They shoved us in there, more or less. Anywhere between 80 and 100 people in one of those small cars. And the people, most people, they made themselves comfortable more or less on the floor, and we had to stand there. I was 13 years old then, and we had to stand like this. And young people, we were holding each other up because we didn't know how long we would stand like that. But we started out over here in the capital city of our state, which was called Kassel, and for 4 days and 4 nights we were on those trains. And we finally arrived on Friday in Riga, Latvia. There were 4 cans in each corner. And of course people had to relieve themselves, because there was not that much liquid, because nobody had anything to drink, and we didn't have anything to eat except what we had with us. But every so often the train did stop, and those cans were emptied, and then they were put back in each corner again. 4 days and 4 nights. This is a map of all of Europe, and it shows how far we went. And then on Friday, we finally arrived at our destination, which was Riga, Latvia. And when we arrived there was so much confusion. And there was so much snow. But first they said, anybody that cannot make the trip, anybody that cannot walk, here we provided for you transportation. So there were trucks and buses there, and they put the people in. And the ones that could walk, they said, you'll see your families later. What did they mean by later? When you're going to be killed, you'll see them in heaven. And that was the case. They never saw each other again. Never saw their families again. We had to walk for 5 long miles in bitter cold weather. And I don't have to tell you how cold it was then, because this year I think you witnessed that cold weather right here, below 0. But we had to walk for 5 miles. Until we came to the ghetto. And when we arrived at the ghetto, this picture, by the way, was taken later on, when there was no more snow. But this is to show. This was the outside of the ghetto, and you can see the 2 black clothed men there. And those were the guards. And the sign says, any person who will try to cross the fence or make contact with anyone through the fence will be shot without notice. And they meant it. This, in 2002, was one of the places where people were taken and they were killed. And there were hundreds of thousands of people were taken there. This was actually before Auschwitz. This is how they killed the people that time. They transported them from Germany to a country like Latvia, and then they took them into the forest, and the machine guns were set up and they were killed. And the people had to dig the trenches. So they had this monument, which they dedicated in 2002, brought these stones in to just mark. But not just Jewish people, as you can see the crosses there, because also non-Jewish people were killed there. When we came, they took us to the ghetto. And when we came to the ghetto, this is what we saw. Furniture, everything had been thrown out. Why? Oops. They threw it. They threw out because people were hiding behind the furniture. So they threw the furniture out so nobody would be hiding inside. And these were Latvian Jews that already were rounded up. Several months ago, as soon as the Nazis took over Latvia and Riga, and they immediately went to the Jewish homes, and then they put them into this one section, and made a ghetto out of it. But on November the 30th and December the 7th, when they took all these people, and they took them to the forest, two places. One is called Bikaniki, like you just saw. The other one was called Rambala. And that's actually what happened. There was food out there, but it was everything that we saw. We couldn't touch anything for months because it was all embedded into the ice and into the snow, and we didn't have anything to eat, and we couldn't even touch it. We didn't even have anything to drink because the wells were all frozen. What we did is scooped up the snow and ate the snow for 2 weeks. And we went out in little buckets and whatever we had and filled it up with the snow. And this was our liquid that we were able to enjoy. In the morning we went to work. And we went to the city to work. Naturally, for the companies, for the Gestapo, for everybody. And at least when we came home at night, we were still together with our families. And this lasted for about 1.5 years, when Eva was taken away with other women to a slave labor camp. And when she left in July of 1943, she had to say goodbye to us and my parents and the twins. I never saw them again. But a month later, which was in August of 1943, they had just finished building the concentration camp in Riga. And they took everyone from the age of 15 up to the age of 50, because anyone that was below 15 and over 50 was left behind because they were too weak. They could not use them for hard work, hard labor that we had to do. And I was 15 then. And then I also left. Left my parents and left the twins, and I had to say goodbye, and I never ever saw them again. So we were taken, here are the women. Their heads were shaved immediately. And of course they also, when I came into the concentration camp, which was called Kaiserwald, and immediately they took the razor and went right through the middle to show that we were prisoners. And then they also gave us the uniform. And that's all we had, was that uniform. No underwear, except what we still had on. The shoes, they let us keep. But how long did those shoes last with the type of work that we had to do? Because we were slaves. And at the age of age of 15, I already had to go into the forest and cut down the trees, not with electric saws, by hand. And then we had to carry the logs right on our back. And it hurt. And it was heavy. We had to load and unload ships that came into the harbor. And there were no cranes that picked anything up because we were the ones that had to load and unload those ships, and we had to climb up the ladders on the sides with heavy crates. We were slaves, and that's why they kept us, because they figured the young people, they're still strong, they can do all that work, but then the older people or little children we have no use for. So in November of 1943, they liquidated the ghetto. They took everyone that was there and put them on trains in the night. And some of our people even helped load them into those trains, into those cars, and they just packed them in. And those trains went into Auschwitz, all the way from Riga into Auschwitz. This is how we were housed on bunks in the concentration camp. And all we got is to eat was liquid in the morning and at night. Most of the time it was from potato skins that they cooked up, because the potatoes were peeled in the kitchen for the soldiers. Meat we never saw, because they gave those to the dog, whatever was left over. This was our barrack in Riga, and when the Russians came closing in, then the Germans, they wanted to destroy the evidence, but they never had the chance. And here is that showing from Riga to Auschwitz. And when those people came to Auschwitz, which included my parents and the twins, and the doors opened and somebody said, "Give me the twins. I want the twins. I'll take good care of them. I love twins." He was the butcher of Auschwitz, or the angel of death. His name was Dr. Joseph Mengele, who did live experiments on twins. He tortured them. He tried to join them together. He cut out the organs, the limbs. He was the worst of all. All these doctors did these experiments, but he was the worst. Mengele. Some of you might have heard about him. That beast, he killed over 300 twins. And I only hope that my two little brothers went with my parents right into the gas chambers and into the ovens and did not have to suffer. But it'll always be a mystery to me. Yes, that's what happens to people when people hate. Hate. Let me tell you, it is the worst word in the dictionary. Jealousy and envy and hate. Each letter in the word in that word of hate has the same connotation as the word itself. Take the letter H. Horror, humility, harassment, harm, hunger. I don't know if you ever tried it. And there are many, many more. The next one is A. Atrocities, anger, abolishment, awful, and so on. Now you can take the next one. T. Got a word for T? No? Okay. How about terror? How about torment? How about torture? Tyranny? Trauma? Let's take the last one. Hate. Hate, the worst word. The last one is E. Got a word? Wait a minute. What? Evil? That's a word? Really? Did you ever put a D in front of that evil? And you know what you got? You get the devil. That's right. I saw the devil. I was with the devil. Evil. Execute. Eliminate. Eradicate. Hate. The worst word in the dictionary. The worst word that we can ever say. I had a letter from a teacher the other day, and she said, I never knew. I never realized that there's something that the word hate can cause so much anger. Because when somebody says, I hate you, how terrible that is. She says, now I learned. And I will not ever, I'll try not to use that word ever again. And I'm going to teach my students the same thing. Yes. You'd be surprised. That's something to think about. Because of hate, all this happened. They hated us. They despised us. Yes, you came up with the final solution. And what was the final solution? The final solution was, that was coined on January the 20th of 1942, when a group of Nazi hierarchy, doctors and officers and professors that were sitting there from Thursday until Sunday and having a good time and drinking and so forth. Now let's discuss why we are here. Because we have to do something with the Jews, about the Jews. And what happened, the final solution, that we're going to kill every Jew on the face of the earth. And Heydrich said, I'm going to kill 11 million. Because that's all Jews. Why? What for? What have we ever done? We wanted to live like anybody else. But we never given a chance to live. Those beautiful children, they never had a chance. We cherish our children so much because we want the best for them. And believe me, they deserve the best. And they did too. But people didn't want them to live. Simply because of the four words, Jude. What difference does it make? We all believe in the same God. And he doesn't say, this is for the Christians and this is for the Jews. We're all the same. Later on, we were taken by ship, a small contingent of us, young people, were taken by ship back to Germany. And first we were in Hamburg, and then after that, there we were for about 5 weeks. We had to load the ships with empty ammunition shells. And I was by myself, with all men. And then we were here in this very large prison and concentration camp in Hamburg. And after 5 weeks, we went on a death march for 4 days and 4 nights. Actually, the distance was 75 miles. Hamburg to Kiel. And that was the most northern city in Germany. And in Kiel, we were there for 3 weeks. And we had to take the bricks from bombed out houses and factories and clean them with our fingers so they could be used over again. They didn't care what our fingers would be like. But for 3 weeks we had to do that. Then finally, on May the 1st, they finally liberated, they finally told us that morning to wait by the gate of the camp. And we didn't know what for, because we thought that was always the end. Then we saw these trucks. But we already heard that some of these trucks, they had hoses attached to the tailpipes and went right inside, and the people were killed. And we thought, that is our turn now. Fortunately, they took us into Denmark. And from Denmark, we went into Sweden. And when we arrived into Sweden, we were finally liberated from the oppressors. Oops. We were first in quarantine, and then we were for 9 months in rehabilitation centers. And while I was there in Sweden, I was finally reunited again with my sister Eva. And at least we were the 2 survivors from the camps of our family. And then a year later, Eva and I, we were fortunate enough to emigrate to this wonderful country, to the land of the free and the home of the brave. And I will never ever forget those words, because it's the best. There are no better words for that. The United States of America. Yes. When I was liberated, after 12 years, from 1935 until from 1933, from 1933 until 1945. Yes. When I was 5 years old until I was 17. And I only weighed 76 pounds when I was liberated. That is my story. And I would welcome anybody that has any questions whatsoever. Please ask, because if you don't ask, you'll never know. Yes, please. I do not have a number tattooed on my arm, If you saw some of the men in the picture before, they had just a badge here and a piece of strip cloth with the number on it. My number was 3625. Okay, because they gave those numbers to people in death camps, and I was in work camp. And the people in work camps did not have the number tattooed on it.
Well, I was just wondering, you were growing up in that little village, and the people, did they change life suddenly in 33, or was it a...
Well, they changed. Number one, they did change. A lot of them changed, and a lot of them became so scared what was going to happen to them, you see, because that they would be punished, that they would be, also attacked or whatever you want to call it. But this is why they were scared.
I mean, like the non-Jewish people.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. The non-Jewish people, because you're a Jew, you're a Jew lover.
I see. Scared of the higher authority.
That's right.
How long did it take for you to find your sister Margaret in America?
What is it?
Would you restate that?
How long?
How long didn't I see Margaret?
Yes.
From 1937 until we came here in 1946.
How did you locate her?
How did we locate her? Actually, when we were in Sweden, they came to us with boards, from asking us for information. Who do you have anywhere in the world that we could contact? We want to contact your families that are outside, and we want to make sure that they know that you were liberated. So first, they contacted my sister in Tel Aviv, and I happen to remember when my mother used to write, and I used to mail the mail, that she was living on 47 Herzliya Street, okay, which I'd never forgot. But she had moved. So a neighbor of hers knew right away where she moved to, and so she was then notifying my brother, who wanted to fight. He was then in the British Brigade out of Israel, out of Palestine, and he wanted to try to find us, find somebody, in the world, so then also my sister in Tel Aviv, she contacted my sister Margaret in New York. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
How can anybody deny the Holocaust when there were hundreds of thousands of soldiers?
Millions, hundreds.
In all of the Allied armies who were eyewitnesses to this. How can anybody deny it?
Well, it takes somebody who even denies the Holy Bible, what happened in the Holy Bible, because some of the things, some of these people will never ever believe, anybody or anything except what they know. So therefore, yes, there are these type of people, they're all over, and anti-Semitism is on the rise again. I want to tell you that right now. Where people are just starting again to hate the Jews. And why? It's the Jews. The Jews are destroying our good government. And I might as well tell that here. It's happening. Why?
Was it difficult to readjust after coming out of concentration camps?
To readjust after you get out.
To readjust after the concentration camp? Well, I'll tell you, it took a long, long time to to come back again to your normal health system, to your mind, to everything else. And of course, it could only happen when we were here in this wonderful country. I was able to go to night school. I did not know English. I had to go to school at night during the work. During the day, I had to work and try to support myself. Nobody helped me. Nobody helped me except a cousin of mine. The night when we came here, the evening when we came here, gave me $10. And that was all that I ever got. But the rest of it, I had to start working and earning. I wanted to even enlist in the United States Army, and they wouldn't take me because I had to have documents first, and like a green card and so forth. And therefore, whatever I did, I had to do myself, and I had to go to school at night and study because I only was able to go to school until 1938, until it was 39, until the 4th grade. That's it. So the rest of it, I had to educate. And as much as I worked, I still went to school at night because I love to learn. And the more we learn, the more we earn. But thank God, unfortunately, I was never allowed to earn. I could never earn too much, become a rich man. No, this is my wealth, when I can talk to people and show people what hate can do.
When you first came into the United States, did you see any anti-Jewish behavior from people from the United States towards you? Did it make your transition harder?
No, not at all. Thank God, I did not have any. Thank you. I did not find any animosities or whatsoever, and truthfully, I never witnessed any even speaking or at any other time, really. Because I think maybe the more I speak and the more I show people what happens to other people, I think they realized, why did I do it? What for? What reason? You see, and when you try to explain to people what causes all that, because it can only be people. You see, and people that are not knowledgeable and people that don't realize. Like I said last week, fortunately, I met the nicest people in Appleton, but no Jews. So somebody could have said, those Jews and those Jews. But you know what? They were very, very hospitable, very courteous, and really I was asked my wife, I was so pleasantly surprised on the people, how wonderful they were, and the children. I spoke to over 1,000 children in 3 days, and really marvelous. I could take each one of them and love them. And they even asked me, could I have a hug? But unfortunately, today we have to be very careful to take the hugs, because it is taken the wrong way. Really, unfortunately. Yeah. So I say now, I'm sorry, no more hugs.
Kurt, back here.
Another good question. After you were liberated and moved to the United States, how long did you wait until you went back to Germany?
Okay, I was invited into Germany about 7 years ago. And that was the first time I went back again. And how did I feel about it? I felt okay. It was okay. Why? Because the people that are there now, you see, is the younger generation. And they absolutely did not know anything about it, because the parents would say, we cannot tell our children those, what happened, or our grandchildren. Grandchildren, of course, they're not, but children, they shouldn't know about that. But you know what? They're learning a lot, and they're going. The classes are going, the schools are taking them right into Auschwitz or Buchenwald or Dachau. They this is this is a requirement that they go to these camps to see what happened. Yes, and I'll tell you, I'm very impressed and highly impressed how they're trying to teach, because they don't want anything like that ever happen again to our country, our Germany.
What type of propaganda did you see mostly about your religion?
What kind of propaganda? There was all kinds of, well, actually, it was only in the beginning where they had the propaganda. Later on, they didn't have to have it, because they had the Jews in their web, you see, and then they didn't have to have any propaganda, you see, because they had them. They caught them, and we couldn't get out. So how much propaganda could they pass on? Not much. Okay?
Good question.
Were you ever angry at God? And if so, have you forgiven him?
Was I ever angry? I am glad that I'm devoted to my religion, or to any religion. There was no reason to be angry at God, because it was not God's doing. This was man's doing. Man killed. And God could not help and say, here, stop it. You see, this was man. Man killed, man tortured, man did everything. God didn't do it. So therefore, how could I be angry at God? I love God, and I was taught to love God, and I will do it until the day comes. In 1945, while I was liberated, was it because of the Americans that won the war, or the Allied that won the war? No, it was not. This was just before this all happened, because in 1945, it was already towards the end. Hitler was already dead, and well, people really weren't 100% sure of that, but he was already dead, and the one in charge was Himmler. Himmler was stationed all the way up north, okay, apparently not very far from the camp that I was in Kiel. So there was a man with the Red Cross. His name was Count Bernadotte. He was a Swedish. He was the Swedish head of the Red Cross at the time, and there were also some Jewish men who had gotten together and said, we have to do something and get these people out as much as we can. Well, they went to him, and they had a lot of money with them, and they went to Himmler and they said, here we have 300 Jewish people in this camp in Kiel. We'll give you a lot of money. Will you release them? And what was Himmler's answer? He says, I will not release any Jew because of the final solution. Again, that final solution, you see, to kill every Jew on the face of the earth. We will not release anybody. Then they said, what about 300 Polish women? Would you take money and release them that are in a place like that? Oh yes, give me the money. Because he wanted to go South America, like the rest of them. Well, anyway, we went out under the name of Polish women. Okay? So we were not released because of the Allied. What's that? Well, the time frame was only days. I mean, it was between, we were liberated on May the 1st. The week later, the war was over.
Okay, I think that pretty well covers it.
It does? Wait a minute. There's somebody else with a finger. Wait a minute.
They were giving me the finger.
Oh, yeah. Oh, here's the finger. Okay, that's enough. Thank you so much, everybody, for your patience and for your wonderful questions and for your attention. And I really wish all of you the very, very best. And I want to thank our hosts for having me come here, having my wife and me come here. And really, I'm most grateful to all of you, definitely, for having stayed and also for listening. And I hope that we can only enjoy peace and peace forever as long as we can live and our families from now on. Thanks for your understanding.
It is we who
Good
thank
luck.
you.
You're welcome.